Small detail there at the moment, but glad to see you all here. Probably going to be inviting or allowing people in this meeting for the next few minutes as we go. But in the meantime, just want to welcome you back and remind everyone that we are recording this meeting. Um, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you don't mind, please put your full name and the affiliation in the chat. And that will help me keep track of who's here and what your affiliation is. And if you could do the same thing by changing your Zoom display name to reflect where you work or what you're representing today, that would be really helpful. Then we can keep track of who's coming from where. I'll just give you a second to do that. Okay, so for those of you who are just joining, we haven't really gotten started yet, but if you could please put your affiliation and name in the chat, that will help me a ton. And also change your Zoom name so we know where you're coming from. That would be incredibly helpful as we have these conversations moving forward. Okay, let's get started on the meeting. Just a few reminders regarding the advisory groups. This group and the other advisory group, which is on packaging, they are charged with performing research and presenting findings to the commission. Advisory groups will meet at least twice. This is the second meeting of the electronics advisory group. Finding on electronics EPR should be completed by Friday, August 29th. So we've got at least 4 weeks here before we need to have something prepared for the full commission meeting on the topic of electronics, which is scheduled for September 17th. Deliverables from the advisory groups are intended to be fact-based, neutral findings to assist the commission in making sound decisions. So I've probably said this before, but I'm going to emphasize it again. This is an opportunity to present just fact-based, neutral findings to the commission. It is not a place to debate details. So hopefully we can stick to that. If you think something isn't clear, then we should present it as a topic for further research and conversation. I'm hoping we get Scott Cassell to join us at some point. I haven't seen him pop up here, but he's going to be joining, I hope, from Product Stewardship Institute.
Hey, Jen, I just got an email that Scott is trying to join from Israel and at the moment is not able to join. So we'll see if we can figure that out. But
Okay.
we may or may not have Scott.
Israel.
Yes.
That's a long way away.
Yeah.
Okay. So the meeting goals for today are to review the content supplied since the first meeting, assess any missing data, and discuss preliminary pros and cons of an electronics EPR approach. I just want to see, like, I didn't memorize all the names of folks who attended the first meeting, but if you had, you should have received a document in the mail, in the email. Sorry, trying to do too many things at once here. Should have received a document that is basically background data that was compiled shortly after I received everybody's research that they sent to me. So hopefully you've had a chance to review that. I'm just going to remind everyone again, if you haven't already, please include your affiliation in your Zoom name. That way we have an idea of which organization you represent. Any questions or comments about the goals today? Okay. Cool. Then the meeting agenda will be to quickly present the combined findings Then we're going to have a bit of a discussion about questions you might have, if there's missing data that we should continue to search for, and maybe a little bit of pros and cons of the electronics EPR approach. That way we're really presenting everything that we need to present to the commission. And then we'll just share some next steps and meeting feedback. All right, so the presentation is really one presentation, but it's sort of going to morph into a discussion. And this is coming from me, and I am not an expert in this topic. I'm just going to emphasize that. But based on the data that was sent to me and some additional information I researched, I'm going to share the following few slides with you. So what we found was that there's an average of 24 devices per household, electronic devices. There's a total of 3 billion electronic devices in the United States. And complex composition makes disassembly tough. It's a much tougher topic than something like a mattress or paint. There are some somewhat positive trends, though. Electronic waste recycling peaked in 2015 and has been steadily declining. Sorry, I think that's incorrectly stated. It's electronic waste has peaked in 2015, and then due to recycling, the waste part has steadily been declining. And I'll point out that I noticed even after I wrote the document that there were somewhat contradictory pieces of information. I had one on page 1, there was a comment that electronics waste has accelerated, and then in a couple of paragraphs later, it has declined. So, and those are both pieces of information from the EPA, and I'm trying to figure out which is which. Juanita.
So I'm sure others on this call can also offer some clarity on that, but it all has to do with whether or not you're talking about the weight of the material. So in the waste stream, everything is based on weight. So electronic waste recycling peaked in 2015 based on weight. So there is still a very growing stream of electronics. It's just that all the devices keep getting smaller and less weight. And so that's why things can seem contradictory, but it's because of this very common trend over the last 10, 15 years for electronic devices to become smaller and smaller and smaller and lighter and lighter and lighter. And so those are like the two competing kind of the two competing factors there.
Okay, that helps a lot. Yeah, I think probably when I go back into that document, I'll try to clarify what that means. And just to what Juanita just said, electronic materials are getting lighter. And then many problematic materials are being designed out of products. There are a number of environmental concerns associated with electronic materials going into the waste stream. And this is particularly if these materials get shipped to countries that don't quite have the same hazardous household waste and safety laws that we have in the United States. There could be open air burning and acid baths to recover electronic components. Some toxic materials can leach into the environment. Workers could be exposed to contaminants such as lead, mercury, cadmium, and arsenic. Some of these exposures can lead to irreversible health effects. And then there are brominated flame retardant contents that are linked to endocrine disruption and thyroid dysfunction. Waste diversion is, sorry, Katie.
Just one note on the last slide, Jennifer. I think it's important to kind of link those concerns with why the electronics recycling industry has evolved so much over the past 2 decades, why we have certifications like the eSteward certification in R2, and it is to address some of the concerns that are highlighted here. I think it's just kind of important to connect those two together. Like we don't typically have open air burning or acid baths here in the United States, as well as that's the whole reason why we have the downstream due diligence that's performed under those certification programs to help prevent materials from ending up in the first place. So just kind of a connection as we're talking about this. It's one of the reasons why there's been such a push for those certification programs to exist to help avoid some of these environmental concerns downstream.
Yes, and I do have a slide about those 2 certifications coming, actually 3 coming up. Amanda?
Hi, yes. Oh, sorry. Trying to come off video, but I'm not able to do so. Scott Cassell of the Product Stewardship Institute is attempting to join today's meeting. He is joining from Israel today, and the Zoom will not permit him to join the meeting. I believe there's an IP address restriction, and I'm wondering if the person who's hosting can change that setting so that he's able to join the meeting.
Amanda, I have looked for that and I don't see any setting that appears to do that. I'll kind of keep on scanning around a little bit, but I'm not sure I can fix that right now.
Yeah, I don't believe it's within the meeting. I believe it's in the Zoom account. So if you go to edit the meeting, there is a section of the Zoom meeting set up that allows you to enable various limitations of countries who can join in that. So it's outside of the actual Zoom meeting
Yep.
module in the web portal. I can send some
Do that.
instructions,
I'm
John.
looking at our Zoom account. I'll see what I can do, but I also kind of have to focus on everyone who's here. I'll see what I can do.
Thank you. All right, so back to this slide. There has been a significant decrease in computer-related electronics in Massachusetts municipal solid waste from 2010 to 2025, which is good news. And then a few tidbits about Massachusetts electronic waste collection. Fees range from $1 to $50, depending on the item and the collector and the weight of a product. There was a waste characterization study that was performed in Massachusetts, and we have some data, but not all. Sorry, do we have another question? Amanda, is that a legacy hand, or do you have another comment? Oh, legacy hand. All right, Juanita?
Sorry, you're welcome to go through the rest of this slide, but I was just going to say regarding like the fees, it's just really important to distinguish that those are user fees because municipal governments, if they're providing this collection, are still paying whether the user sees that or not.
Yes, thank you. All right, I'm going to zip through the rest of these slides and we can come back and talk about any of them that you'd like, but I'll just point them out. All of this information came from the report, so again, all up for discussion. So again, the municipal waste characterization study asked municipalities about waste characteristics, but not all information was necessarily collected in a way that might be helpful for this discussion. So 276 municipalities reported that they are collecting televisions and computers. 268 report that they collect additional electronics, such as DVDs, and I imagine that meant DVD players, not DVDs, in addition to VCRs, phones, and stereos, etc. Oops. In terms of collection and the convenience of collection, this data, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this data was implied that there was probably data that was collected about waste collection in general, but not necessarily electronics collection. Is that correct?
No, this is actually the number of municipalities that report collecting electronics for recycling, and it is divided based on whether those municipalities run primarily drop-off or primarily curbside programs.
Okay.
In some cases, both. So this is electronics, but we do not have the curbside drop-off distinction is based on their primary program collection.
Okay. Great. And I will let you just read this slide. Don't need for me to read it down for you. Katie, do you mind if we just get through the rest of the slides before we get back to you? Thank you. All right, then 214 municipalities collect electronic waste year-round, and remember that there are 351 municipalities in Massachusetts, so it's about 2/3. And then 62 collect electronic waste at varied frequencies, meaning it's maybe once or twice a year or at special collection events. There are two main certifiers for electronics waste recyclers. One is called R2, which is run by the Sustainable Electronics Recycling International. The other one is called eStewards. And there are additional certifications that recyclers can obtain from the ISO, or the International Organization for Standardization is actually what it is. And they have fairly lengthy requirements to get through to become certified. In general, the waste process looks something like this, and I'll just let you look through it. And then there are different types of EPR in the United States. 10 states plus DC has weight-based goals. That tends to be a bit of an older model. In most cases, financial penalties are incurred if the goals are not met. And then, as some states were recognizing that because electronics are getting lighter, weight-based goals are not quite the most current or most accurate way of measuring success in these programs. So 14 states use other EPR parameters, such as take-back programs, market share, and then simply educational programs, which are just more or less voluntary. And then fees and rates are set through a variety of means. And that can include negotiation or just simply an assignment of a fee by an authority. And then California has a point of sale system. It's a fee that consumers pay when they purchase something, and then it is remitted to the state, which then reimburses the collection and recycling system for those specific electronics. And then the next few slides were some slides that PSI supplied, and I believe there's some questions about them. So I wanted to give PSI an opportunity to respond. I think Scott may or may not be the best person to help with this, but we do have Amanda with us right now. So since Amanda is just being put on the spot, maybe I should go back to Katie and ask if she still has a question or comment.
My question was just, what does centralized mean? I mean, I know a lot about these programs. To an outsider, there may be some confusion on what centralized means. And we have two different versions of centralized that are sort of represented here. One is sort of those Northeast states in Washington, where the state or state contractor is operating the program. And then in Illinois and in Oregon, where it's more of like a clearinghouse model where producers are operating the system. So I just kind of wanted, there's a lot of nuance in these programs. And so I just wanted to make sure that all sort of stakeholders understood what was meant by like centralized or convenience. We also have states like New York that are both performance goal driven plus convenience based requirements. So again, just trying to kind of the nuance of all these programs can get becomes important just to understand. Like an Oregon and an Illinois are not the same type of program as a Maine and Connecticut and a Vermont. So just want to provide that distinction.
And there were a couple questions that Katie raised prior to the meeting about some of the Massachusetts data. And I think I hopefully fixed the Zoom setting for Scott to join. So I'm kind of waiting to see if he pops in here, but maybe we can bounce back to the Massachusetts data for a minute and just clarify some of those questions. I think it's starting with that fee slide. Yeah. So yeah. First on the fees, those are fees that municipalities report charging their residents for electronics recycling. Well, we don't have a further breakdown of those fees, so we don't know what fee is charged specifically for what. but their fees reported being charged to accept recycling, and they're driven by varying costs that, as Juanita mentioned, that municipalities are facing for downstream recycling. Obviously, that varies quite a bit from one type of electronic device to another. But that's the data we have reported from municipalities, and I know we've checked it, sort of reality check just a couple of those as examples. So that's data that's being reported to us. And then there were some questions about the curbside drop-off too, which we sort of talked about already. But that was, if you can jump to the next slide, I think, Jen. Yeah, this one. So this was, again, self-reported data. It's not, we don't have every material curbside drop-off reported out separately for every material, but this is what came in based on their primary collection type. It's possible that not all of the curbside programs are collecting electronics curbside, but that's their predominant collection method. And we verified that at least in some cases that is how electronics are being collected. Can't say for certain 100% of those, but often they're being collected with other materials. It may be part of a bulky waste collection program or something like that. So that's what's happening with that program collection data. And then there was one other question that came up kind of related to this about grant funding that MassDEP provided early on to municipalities. This was when we were implementing a waste ban for cathode ray tubes in 2006. We gave out grants for several years to municipalities to help cover electronics recycling costs, CRT recycling costs in particular. And there was a reference to those programs no longer being in place in the document we wrote up for the last meeting. And we'll clarify that. What we meant by that is that the grant funding is no longer in place. So the programs are still in place, but the grant funding is not. So we'll clarify that in the next version of the report. So just wanted to address some of those questions that have been raised in between the two meetings about the Massachusetts collection data.
Excellent. Thanks, John. Juanita?
So I guess I'm asking for clarity on this, but I can't remember where it was on the slides, maybe one ago or two back. It was about year-round collection, wherever that is. Here, okay. So I think that number could be misinterpreted or misleading, because my understanding of that number is that it's considered year-round collection if a municipality accepts it, even if their site is only open once a month. Would that be accurate? That it would still be like they would say, oh, we collect it year-round, but they only offer access and hours like whenever their site is open to accept that material.
I don't have the definition right in front of me, but I believe you're right about that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we now have Scott reporting in from Israel, apparently.
Yes, I'll change the name on here. Sorry about that. I guess that the political issues go into Zoom as well.
Always. All right, Scott. So we've kind of gone through my slides, and they just highlighted parts of the deck or parts of the report that we sent out. So we were kind of hoping to get some input from you about kind of some questions regarding this page or this graphic. And I think Katie from CTA had those questions. John offered a little bit of background, but the hope is that you can provide some detail.
Be happy to. Let me just get the information. I just need to put up one thing. Okay. Katie, are you there?
She indicated she had to step away for a second, so it could be that she is still
Okay.
gone.
So I think those are her questions, so I
Yeah.
think it makes the most sense to wait till Katie's back.
Yeah, so most of the rest of the slides that were things that Katie had questions about. And I think her point about this slide is that every state's program is so nuanced and different that it would be hard to lump them into categories like this. And I tend to agree, and I think that's addressed somewhat in the report because we have two tables, one of which that, divides it up into weight-based goals, and the other table has other types of goals. And I'll also point out that we don't yet have an inclusion of. So one of the questions that Katie asked about was the results of these programs and the reductions in the waste stream. And Scott, I think you had data from 2019, and Jason was providing more recent data. And then Jason and I have been going back and forth about the presentation of that data. And so we don't quite have that ready for, to show.
So let me just address, first of all, yes, as you see with the source, it's 2021 when this was done. So there's newer data, I'm sure. And it was data from 20 years of research and experience, including discussions with our state and local members in all of these states. And including as well as the National Center for Electronics Recycling, which is Jason, and CTA. So, we had discussions with all of those. There are several reports that we had done. I'd be happy to dig it up. I don't frankly think that for the purposes of this group, that is worth the time of this group. I'm sure that there's more updated information, but the reason this hasn't been updated since 2021.
Scott, just to stop you, sorry, I'm referring to a graphic that I didn't include in this slide deck, and that was results from each state, not the characterization of the programs. So I don't think there's a problem with the fact that this was 2021.
I thought that this was the characterization of these being non-EPR states or centralized or convenience-based programs. Is that not
No.
that? Well, that's what this you're showing me a map.
Yeah, I know. So the
that's what I
issue
was.
I think that Katie has with this slide is that the characterization is maybe not nuanced enough, just based on the fact that most of these states have very specific programs.
This is this comes from a report and that has much more data about it and analysis. And so this is a slide as part of a presentation. Looks like Katie's back. Katie?
Yes, my sincere apologies, and I sort of kind of came in mid-conversation here. I was just wanting to make sure everyone was aware that, centralized or convenience-based programs, there's just a lot of nuance with these programs, kind of how Maine and Vermont and Connecticut operate is different than Illinois and Oregon. And, we have states like New York that are both performance and convenience-based. So that was all. I didn't necessarily say I had an issue with it. I was merely trying to point out that there's a lot of nuance in these programs. You kind of have to be in the weeds of the programs a bit to sort of understand all of that nuance and what may be captured with terms like centralized and convenience-based. And my apologies for having to step away. We've had a plumbing catastrophe at our house, so I was dealing with the contractor.
Oh boy, contractors definitely are the top priority. So I couldn't agree with you more, Katie. These are very nuanced and no kind of compartments like this does them justice. But what you said, and even the term centralized, I think it was mentioned to me that you were mentioning this as kind of state type of programs, and I would agree with that. That's what our state, officials called centralized somewhat, meaning got more government oversight and activity about them.
Okay. The next slide was it was written up as sort of lessons learned in the report, and maybe I mischaracterized it that way. But Katie also had questions about where this came from.
Yeah, Katie, did you want to add anything about this, unless you're dealing with that very important?
I just
concept?
asked for a question about the study and the conclusions that were determined. A link to the study would be great. That was all.
This here was, I'm looking for, okay, the implementation challenges. So the challenges, using that term, it's meaning basically aspects of the program implementation that need to be addressed. And they were developed by PSI based on numerous discussions, again, with state and local government, recyclers, and also CTA. I think you know that we've been working with you more, Walter. You're the former the head of CTA, who you've now taken the reins from. And so this is just some of the challenges that we have felt needed to be. I can go into the third bullet. As weight of electronic devices decreased, weight-based metrics are insufficient measure of program success. This was actually, and I think you would hopefully agree with this, that it's a strong concern made by CTA that basically convinced many of our government agencies to replace the weight-based standard with only a convenience standard, or to include both in modified form, which, as you mentioned, New York ended up doing. And PSI did work with some of these states, including Illinois and New York, to make these statutory or regulatory amendments to them. I can't remember how they worked in each state, but it's been a while. One thing you might have missed was that some of the, the data that I provided earlier had 2021. As you know, it's a simmered down issue until maybe like as states wanting to amend old laws, or states with outlaws wanting new laws. And Massachusetts kind of fits into that category. So I'd say it's starting to bubble up again in terms of interest with all the other EPR products out there and priorities. So I think that this is good timing. And I just want to offer our assistance and interest in meeting with you to make sure that we have the best data.
Katie?
Thanks, Jennifer. My question wasn't on anything that was presented from the study. It was purely could we get a little more background on the study, a link to the study, so we can figure out who was engaged, how were the conclusions determined, etc. That was purely what I was asking about. I was not calling into question any of what was presented. So we just wanted to make that clear. A link to the published study would be great, I think, to include for everyone for additional background information.
Okay, so this was not coming from any one particular study. It's coming from multiple studies and multiple conversations over multiple years. And so this is a slide that, frankly, I put together with some of the others at PSI as just, this is a briefing, for a state that wants to know, hey, what are the issues? What do we need to pay attention to? I think switching from weight-based to convenience-based standards is important. The lack of a coordinating body has been very important. Some states want to go the route of a clearinghouse. As I believe this is the sort of the fact that the electronics industry is, because they were the first ones to enter into discussions on EPR way back in 2000, there is not a PRO, one PRO. The industry had two groups representing them, and now it's CTA representing them solely. But the concept of a PRO, coming from Europe and Canada, came in here after the electronics discussions, those 4 years from 2000 to 2004. So the concept of a clearinghouse is, which NCER, or maybe ERCC, the Jason anyway, is playing that role, and contributes to that statewide consistency and fair and equitable distribution of costs and collection amounts. And he has a formula, and you, I'm sure, know it, how that's divvied up in an objective way, and that works in Illinois with the 6 service areas. Oregon didn't want to go that route because they had a different program. That's getting back to the very beginning. So of the conversation is that there's so many different types of programs that are out there. We're probably starting from, almost a fresh slate, if you will, in terms of lots of data, but it's not like batteries and paint and mattresses where there's a number of states either that have a model from the very beginning, or with batteries, it really has evolved, particularly over the past 5 or 10 years. So maybe that's something for people here on the call to know, is that it's a different ballgame with electronics. Plus, Massachusetts has a 2+ decade ban on with CRTs, at least, and I know that they're mostly out of the system. So it's different out there.
John?
Yeah, I was just going to make a broader comment, not about this slide in particular, but really about all of the slides and the background document we sent out prior to the first meeting, thinking about what we're trying to accomplish in the advisory group here. So what I think our goal is for this meeting and any further communication we have between now and preparing this information to share with the EPR Commission is to get as much information as possible that we can provide as background. So what I want to encourage everyone here and others who participated in this discussion is, if you have additional information, and again, not necessarily specific to this slide, but just across all the issues we're talking about, we want to get that information so we can gather that together and put it together in this combined information from the advisory group. So that's what we're after here today, and following up on today. So I just want to, for all of you to think about, if you have additional information that you want to share, whether you get to share it today or whether you reach out to us after the meeting, is fine too. We'd love to put all that information together and make it as complete as we can.
Yeah, I think thank you so much, John, because I think that's exactly correct. And to follow up on Scott's comments, I think maybe what Katie is asking for is just a little bit more documentation about, how did you arrive at some of these conclusions? And maybe that's like just a footnote with some explanation, or maybe like flesh out each one to say, like, here's what we've been finding in certain states. Some laws have changed in these particular ways. But a little more context would be helpful, I think, in the longer written background document. Does that make sense?
I can provide information on this. I guess the question is there, Katie, is there anything about these that you find not accurate, and needing that? Most of these are rules of thumb. I mean, they're kind of very, very basic here. And so this is like common knowledge out there, and it's evolving. So like, lack of convenience standards limits access to services. That's on every single product. That's an issue. Lack of a coordinating body. If you have multiple PROs or no PRO, in the case of electronics, it contributes to inconsistency. You know, there's just different programs. It's more of a challenge that is there. And then inadequate program funding, well, that's just relating to, you know, that other slide. I mean, if you don't have adequate funding, you know, it's not defining a mechanism that well. And I mean, this is common knowledge. I don't think for the sake of this group that it's worth their time. I'd be happy to provide any information that would help this group. And if Katie or others feel like they need information, I think the most important thing now is to figure out what the problems are this moment in Massachusetts related to electronics. And with the data that are provided, that should come in as to, you know, how much has been, you know, sold into the state, how much is, you know, coming out of service per year, different types of products. That stuff I'm sure Katie and Jason are tracking. And then how much is recycled and how much is disposed and who has access and who doesn't. I mean, those are the things that are most important.
Katie, do you want to respond?
Sure, Jennifer. I think this goes back to the kind of how you had started this off. So I want to make clear, I've not brought into question anything that's presented here on this slide. In the background documentation that was sent around, it says in 2025, PSI identified the following lessons learned, blah, blah, blah. My question was merely, I assumed this was a study. I asked about reference to the study and, you know, where these conclusions were drawn from. That was it. So I think, Jennifer, we can probably move on. I don't want to talk through this component. It was merely just a question. This is for background documentation. If there was a document that was referenced as part of this, it would just allow folks, if they wanted to do a further deep dive to reference into that document. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're going to move on to an even worse sticky wicket, because Katie, I think you had the same questions about this slide, just referencing where did some of these, you know, elements of stable electronics come from? And I think, Scott, you're probably going to have similar responses, like they've evolved over time.
I think what's most Yes.
Sorry, can I just want to butt in for a second. I think, Jennifer, this goes back to the same question I had on the last one.
Yeah.
Again, it seemed like it was an assessment that was done, so I assumed there was a link to a report with additional background documentation and implementation. So I don't know that we need to go through and discuss to death the pieces and components. I wasn't calling into question. I was merely assumed there was a study or a report that was connected to this information and was seeking reference.
Thank you, Katie. And so, you know, this is again, yes, based on many reports, many discussions, and this, I mean, for example, it's the scope comprehensive. The question is, well, what is comprehensive? That's what we discuss with stakeholders and say, well, what do you think is reasonable? Where are the programs now? And CTA, what do you think is the best scope for this? And we use an elements document like this, as I have presented already a couple of times, and presentations are different than presenting on a report. I'm giving an overview, a basic background for everyone, you know, in this. I wasn't asked to, you know, to write a report or contracted to do so or bring things up to date. I was asked to give a basic overview, and all of these things here, including responsible party, the brands, you know, the manufacturer that's a brand or a franchisee, or the importers, it's the same, whether it's electronics or it's batteries or it is packaging, but there are many details of each of those product areas that I'm sure Katie is much more familiar than most about all of the ins and outs of the complexity of even that one topic. So I think that this is just, these are the 16 elements that PSI has developed, about 15 years ago, and we use on all of our products. And just, it's a way to educate people, break it down. It's a reductionist approach, but it's a way to break it down and have conversations that have proven to get people on the same page. And so that's the 16 elements, and they're the same elements, like, for the most part. Some of these are a little bit different, but that's what we've used, and that was the intent here. And I did not go over each one of these in depth on the call, if those people who were on recall that meeting.
Scott, I'll be in touch with you if there's like something that is more fleshed out that I can include in the report. That would be really helpful. Great. Yeah, I just have a feeling it's, like there's some, for the sake of including it in a slide, it's probably not enough words.
I think to put all of these things in, this is the guts of legislation, and I frankly would not want to do that, because we're at very, very early stages of discussion here, and this is a tool that we use to have discussions with state and local government, the manufacturers, CTA, which we've worked on in the near past, to get on the same page and work with the states and local governments and the recyclers as well, and Jason, who's a very big player in this. So yeah, this is not something that I would recommend going in at this point. I mean, unless Greg wants me, PSI, to do a little bit more, and then I would, I could do this and then talk to others about it, including CTA and Jason and others, and bring that into the group. That would be helpful, I think.
John?
Yeah, I think I would agree with Scott on a slide like this, that this is intended to be kind of an overview of common elements in these EPR programs. It's similar to what we presented on paint and mattresses that Scott developed for those meetings as well. So I tend to agree. I think a deep dive on this would be too much in the weeds for what we want to try to do. I think, just going back to Katie's comments, I think what we can do is just provide a little bit of background and description about where this sort of information is coming from and how it was derived. So I think that's probably what we ought to, and I think we can do that offline, not take up any more time here, but come up with a little more description to kind of explain the genesis of this information.
Great.
Great. Thank you, John.
All right. So I'd like to open this up for discussion and ask, what questions do you have that would help clarify the right path to electronics EPR? Related to that, what data is missing? And then what are the pros and cons you see of existing EPR programs throughout the US? And this can be based on some of these slides and or the report. Juanita.
So at the first advisory group meeting, my homework task was to gather municipal cost data, and I was able to get a survey launched, but I was not able to get the data accumulated and analyzed in order to provide it in time, like ahead of this meeting. So that is data that I can provide following this meeting. We set the deadline for municipalities to respond to that survey as August 1st, just because it took us, I don't know, a week after the first meeting to get it launched. And so it's a busy time of year for municipalities with like year end in July. So we wanted to allow ample time for them to provide responses. Right now we have heard from 44 municipalities, and certainly we want to grow that number. So that is other information that is currently being accumulated, but not kind of ready for sharing in this group yet.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, that will help. Katie?
A follow-up question to Annetta. So, and I apologize because I did have to step away there for a second. As part of that information grab, are you all also asking about sort of what's in scope of electronics? I know different states, different collection sites, electronics may differ. So I'm just curious of what is typically falling into that definition of an electronic for various Mass communities. I think that would be good to see if you have that, and I apologize if it was addressed while I had to step away.
Oh, yeah. So it wasn't addressed while you stepped away. This is the first time I'm bringing up the survey since like the idea of it at the last call. I'm trying to see. So like, I think the way that we did it, just for somewhat brevity in the survey and like kind of user friendliness, we asked based on a couple of different categories. So whether they collected CRT TVs and monitors or flat screen TVs and monitors, and then computers, and then we said other electronics, and that included in, you know, a parenthetical like cell phones, DVD players, video game consoles, etc. So like they could select from those three kind of like categories, but it's not more specific than that.
I kind of asked as like conversations are happening in other states as well, specifically kind of the category of small appliances, which is outside my membership scope a little bit, but I see a lot of times when folks talk about electronics, you know, sometimes blenders and toasters and toothbrushes and all of that get lumped in there. So I was just, that's why I asked that question, sort of how are you all defining electronics? Because it does seem to vary.
So that's completely fair. And in our survey, we didn't spell out more of a definition than the options that we provided, which again were like those three kind of broad categories. My suspicion is most folks that will be completing this survey are in the role of like recycling coordinator or, you know, solid waste manager, whatever that is. So those folks would be knowledgeable on like what their electronics recycling provider wants to receive. So it's not kind of like it's not like public facing. It's much more like the folks that are handling the system. So I don't suspect that that would be a problem here. If that's at all helpful.
Thanks.
I'm sensing that it would be a good question to put before the commission, or at least raise as, you know, a basic definition of electronics in this context is something that we want to address at some point.
I have feedback on that. So like, I think at the wider commission meeting, I would suggest that coming out of this group, we could have some type of, I don't know, I'd say rough proposal, but essentially a suggestion to have a scope that at least excludes things like what Katie was just talking about. So, you know, like some people advocate for like, oh, we want to be able to recycle anything with a cord. But when you talk with an electronics recycler, they do not want anything with a cord. They only want things that, like what I tend to say to our residents is like, if it has a circuit board. So like your toaster does not have a circuit board and your blender does not have a circuit board. Well, maybe your fancy blender does, but um it's I try to tell people it's from like your home office and your home entertainment system are like the two areas of the home that like your home electronics would come from for our electronics recycling program. And to a much, much lesser degree, the kitchen, probably almost nothing from the kitchen. I do think that that's helpful context for like other stakeholder groups that would be represented on the commission to understand what it is that we're talking about when we say electronics. It's kind of just like this confusing term to the public at large.
I thank you so much for that. I agree. I feel like it could go anywhere. Is there, let me ask this, for those things that have a cord or don't have what'd you say, a circuit board, is there a separate program for that? Like, are we limiting this conversation? This is just about EPR, and those products have a separate life cycle.
Yeah, I would definitely say that those would be separate from like electronics collection. And in general, they don't tend to have value in the recycling stream, which is why
Okay.
they're not prioritized. They're
Okay.
also not going to contain a lot of the heavy metals that were referenced before, which makes it much less of an environmental concern. You know, it's always great to be able to recycle and recover whatever you can, but there has to be a market on the other side. And so with those items that we're talking about, like a blender, for example, it's unlikely to be desirable to an electronics recycler or any other recycler for that matter.
Thank you. Katie.
Just a few thoughts to that question. As background, there isn't a current electronic CPR program here in the US that includes those items in scope. So that just might be a background point to provide. And Jason Linnell at NCER, they have some good maps and other lists of the products that are included in scope of each program, if that's helpful as additional background information to include.
Did you say that some of those products are not included in any EPR program?
Correct. Well, Winetta
Or-
was talking about like the blenders and the toasters
Okay.
and those. So it might be good to provide, and NCR has some good resources there on the list of products that are included in scope of the current electronics EPR programs.
Okay.
Those lists do exist. The states each have them. And then as Winetta was speaking, I was curious if it would be beneficial to have an electronics recycler come in if the advisory committee feels that that additional information is needed. I know some of us, have more experience in the electronics recycling industry than others. Winetta was talking about what has value in the system versus, might not have value in the system. So it could be beneficial to bring in an electronics recycler to speak to that if there's a desire.
Okay. Thank you. Phil?
Just to give you a perspective from a operations perspective, let's say what we do at our recycling center. We focus on the waistband and other band items. So cathode ray tubes, flat screens, computers that can go on a pallet, that can be stabilized with film. We just kind of wrap it, put it in a pallet, and it's outside in the weather, and they come and get it and put it in 53-foot trailer, CRS. So that's what we focus on. We call e-waste. Cathode, monitor, CPUs, all that. All the other stuff like a boom box and old printer, right now that would be so loose, it'd be hard to put on a pallet efficiently. And I'm thinking Gaylord box, which is these big cubic yard boxes. But that needs to have a separate cover, shed, so it doesn't get rained on. I don't know what you do when you get it down at the recycling center, but that's another category you'd like to get. It's, eventually going to be something we do, but that's 28 cents a pound, adds up fast. But we focus on the items that are banned either through the Mercury Act or waistbands and can be easily managed on a pallet. So maybe that's one way to break it, at least for Massachusetts.
Thank you.
At the Newton Resource Recovery Center, we do collect in Gaylord boxes, and we did construct an outdoor, I don't know what you call it. It's like a little mini pavilion that covers our
Yeah, like a
electronics
lean-to, something to
collection.
keep the snow and rain out.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's what I thought.
And that's actually after many years of not having that and issues of Gaylords falling apart and my staff needing to piece them back together. And it was,
Precisely my
like
point, yeah.
limping along. And so we finally just put in something, we're just like, this isn't going anywhere. So let's just protect it a bit. And
So
Yeah.
I would imagine there are others, there are similar situations because they can put it in a pallet and put the shrink wrap around it with the bigger items, the TVs and the monitors that stay there and it gets a little wet. That's, never had a problem with the recyclers taking that, but it's the small stuff in Gaylords. It becomes a real mess and phones all over the place, and keyboards.
Katie?
Yeah, kind of this conversation here between Phil and Winetta sort of maybe goes back to one of my earlier questions, that again, I apologize that I had to step away for a second. But when it was the kind of the readout on how electronics are currently being collected throughout Massachusetts, and I know there was comments about potentially collected curbside. Did we get any clarification on that piece? Are electronics being collected? Do we have that confirmation that they are being collected curbside?
John, you wanna?
Yeah, I commented on that, but I think it was probably when you were away, so sorry about that. So we do not know community by community. So what we get is data reported from communities. They report their type of curbside or recycling program overall, and they report their electronics collection. We do know that some municipalities are collecting electronics curbside. We don't know for certain that all of them that have curbside programs are also collecting electronics curbside, but we know at least some of them are. We don't have the data to break it down. We don't have the specific data about how each material is collected. We're collecting data about a whole bunch of materials in the same survey, and we don't have this detailed curbside drop-off breakdown for each one. So there was an assumption on our part about curbside collection may not be the case for all of them.
Okay, thanks. And then it sounds like for additional background, again, based on the conversation that just happened, it may differ by municipality in terms of how electronics are being collected. If say it's a drop-off site at a transfer station or an HHW facility. I don't know if it's helpful. I know that Illinois EPA has put together under their electronics EPR program sort of a collection site best practices document. Is that worth providing as background information just in terms of how other states, their expectations for how electronics are collected under their EPR programs?
Yeah, I think
I
that's
don't-
definitely.
Okay, I can send that over. I just thought it might be helpful. It's probably, unless I'm not remembering another state that has that kind of guidance, I think it's probably the most comprehensive guidance of any of the states in terms of how collectors are collecting and expected to operate under an EPR program.
That's
feel like-
helpful for drop-off centers. If there were EPR, what the PRO would provide, would they provide the Gaylords? Would they provide a shelter, for the Gaylords? Different kind of container that's all weatherproof. We have limited space, limited staff, and we start getting hundreds of different types of these smaller appliances and old phones and things. It can't be in a pile on the ground somewhere. So if states are doing it and they already have those logistics, I'd love to see that. I think that's something to consider.
Sure, I just put a link in the chat to that collector's best practices, and then I can send over as well. So again, we don't have a formal PRO for the electronics industry. We do have sort of group plans, I would call them. And then in a state like Illinois, that's probably the closest to what you're thinking of as a PRO with the clearinghouse that operates there. And there is, I believe, sort of I don't think an expectation document is the right word. And Jason, if you're on, you might be able to help me here. But I also believe there's kind of something that collectors need to sign in terms of like, this is your expectation of participating in the program and what we expect. So I can try and dig that up as additional background information. That's probably the closest we have, Phil, to what you were just speaking to.
Here, I just quickly looked at the picture of the gentleman with the giant saran wrap. That's
Yeah,
exactly what we
sure.
do.
Okay.
He's just going around a pallet with some monitors, and that's what I would say most drop-offs are dealing with. They're doing all the small stuff we need is ahead of everybody. Certainly at the top of the curve, because you got to build another lean-to protect it, because the Gaylords will get soaking wet, they'll fall apart, like she said.
Juanita?
Yeah, just touching a little bit more on like I think a couple of things that Katie touched on about the patchwork quilt of services provided by municipalities. That it just ranges tremendously. So like there's 351 municipal jurisdictions, and I almost guarantee you there's 351 varieties of programs. Like there's just everyone is their own little fingerprint as far as like programs go. So touching on one of the questions on the slide, like, and related to that subject, I think one of the pros of existing EPR programs is basing the performance standard on, or just basing like the performance of the program on the convenience, like how convenient it becomes to the general population that needs to get rid of these items. And right now, I think the data that we have may make it sound like it's a convenient network of like municipal government offerings to collect these materials. But I think in actuality and in practice, it's not convenient at all. And I do think that that leads to a lot of materials that are not captured, not recovered. And, I think there's, going back to, other parts of this conversation about like, okay, what are we really trying to accomplish here? I think it's certainly we want to get these valuable materials out of the waste stream, and we want to prevent any type of damage to the environment or, human health and safety. But I think it's, the kind of fundamentals of recycling. Like if there are high value materials, you want to capture them and prevent and offset the need for mining of virgin materials. We know that a lot of these electronic devices have high value materials in them, but overall, unless like a municipality has really gone out of their way, I don't think that there's a general message to the public in Massachusetts on how to properly recycle your electronics and why it's important. And it just like there's no kind of emphasis in the civic discourse on like, hey, some like you should be paying attention to this. I think an EPR system would create a more unified like education system and messaging that is completely lacking. Like it doesn't exist here. And it would help alleviate a lot of that consumer confusion. I could go on, but I'll stop there.
What do we think is the EPR element that might work best?
So a convenience standard is one thing. I don't know from the list of elements. I know it's somewhere in there, but like a landfill ban or disposal ban on a lot of these other consumer electronics can also help in messaging and kind of motivating the public, saying like you can't put that in the trash anymore. So, last meeting I pointed out on the mural board that like it is okay right now to put a computer in the trash. And like for most of us, that's going to feel icky. Like it's like, wait, what? That can't possibly be okay. But it is completely okay right now. And so changing that, I mean, could certainly be done without an EPR system, but the funding mechanism then needs to be there to fund the collection system, like more sustainably than it currently is.
So it sounds like, asking producers to help fund an education program is like bare minimum.
I would definitely say that's bare minimum. I think it's much more about like like the function of an EPR system for electronics creates a sustainably funded, convenient collection system that right now we do not have.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Any other comments about that?
I'll just follow up on what I just said because I think what is not talked about enough is the burden that is placed on municipal governments with the system that we have. So some communities are able to have staffing and prioritize these types of things. They're typically going to be larger populations. Sometimes the community is, more environmentally engaged and, prioritizing things. Most communities do not have adequate staffing to create these types of programs. And that leads to gaps in drop off collection, certainly gaps in education and knowledge for like people trying to get rid of their old cell phone. Like they're just going to have to Google it and find some avenue. And I think for the value of these materials, we can do a lot better than that. And an EPR system has been demonstrated to do that in other states.
Mhm. Thank you. Catherine.
Hi, I am not very knowledgeable about electronic waste. I'm representing the Massachusetts Association of Regional Planning Agencies on the EPR Commission, but I wanted to ask the person who sent us the letter about batteries, Red something, a company that works right now to collect batteries. I'm wondering if a lot of the points that that person made are also relevant to electronics with respect to the importance of not separating this off with a not-for-profit, allowing businesses that are in the mix to be included, and whether that's something that, we should all look at.
A great question.
So I would say that that issue relates to something that has been brought up by Scott in particular, that so the other materials that the commission has looked at, like paint and mattresses and batteries, have coalesced around a specific model and then had a producer responsibility organization that has been formed, so a nonprofit entity representing the manufacturers to accomplish what they are tasked with doing in the model that they are behind, or the law that got passed, whether it's their model or not. With electronics and packaging, the other material that the advisory groups are covering, that has not yet happened. So there's not one model that the industry is like in favor of, and there's not a single PRO that has been developed, although Katie, you can feel free to step in. I haven't been able to kind of keep up to date on all of the things relating to electronics, but I think Scott had just touched on it, that there previously was like 2 clearinghouses and now there's CTA that's like taking that role, but okay, then.
No.
No, sorry. We are a trade association,
Mhm.
CTA, so we represent electronics manufacturers on a multitude of issues on behalf of our member companies, electronics recycling, EPR, electronics EPR being one of those. Jason has his hand up. He is probably the best person to provide that insight. There does not exist one PRO like you see for paint, like you see for batteries, like you see for mattresses that exists for electronics. We have sort of this PRO/group plan/clearinghouse approach. So before I muddle anything up, Jason's definitely more of an expert in this field. If it's okay to just pass it over to him, Jennifer.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. Yeah, and that's right. So there's no single pro. The industry is sort of coalesced around. There's different service providers of compliance services, I guess you could say. Some of them are different companies that provide that service to the manufacturers or groups of manufacturers, and there's actually recyclers themselves that also provide those services. But we do have the models where, like in Illinois and South Carolina, where we manage a clearinghouse where we kind of assemble all those groups into one combined plan and present it to the state, and the state can approve or disapprove of that plan every year. So it's not definitely a pro like we have with other industries like paint or batteries or mattresses or anything like that. But it is something where we can coordinate the activities of the manufacturer recycling programs together and make sure that the parameters of the law are covered, whether it's the convenience requirements, the types of collection activities that have to happen, those types of things. So it's not definitely not what you see in other places, but it is something that kind of can act like that and at least fulfill the requirements of the law under those programs.
Scott, then Katie.
Yeah, I think what Catherine might have been asking was, are there collections? Well, I guess you might have just mentioned it, Jason. What Catherine was asking about batteries or mentioning is that the collections are taking place outside of the main PRO call to recycle. So you had Redwood is the name of the company, and they're collecting right now outside of the PRO, and that's the first time ever for any EPR product. So that's why there's a lot of discussion. But electronics doesn't have the PRO, so it's something different here. The other question, and I'm going to ask you, Jen, perhaps after Katie speaks, is it appropriate to ask? There's some mention here about EPR law for Massachusetts. Like there's going to be a consideration that this group, the commission's going to have to weigh in on, as they did on the others. So you can phrase it the way that is best for this group. But is this something which CTA, and I guess would ask Katie if it's a fair question, is there is there an EPR bill that could be acceptable for Massachusetts that would address some of these issues? Or are there other strategies that are not EPR that the industry is supporting? So that's a question for you, Jen, if that would be appropriate question for this group, because that's something that is key to this group making some recommendation to the
Say
legislature.
this group, Scott, I think you mean the commission.
Commission.
Yeah.
commission.
Yeah,
The
I mean,
commissioners,
I
these
can't
are-
I can't speak for the DEP. It's probably more of a question for John or for Greg, but I would say the expectation is that the commission is really here to study these issues further and provide either a request for more information or more time from the legislature, or provides a recommendation of some kind. John, do you think that's an accurate characterization?
Yeah, I was just trying to look back to our original charge. I think, the way I would put it is that the commission, that's kind of up to the commission what they want to recommend collectively, I think. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a specific bill. I think that's kind of collectively up to the commission what they want to propose. And that may vary, from one material category to another. So maybe it's too soon to answer that question, but I don't think there's like a automatic default recommendation, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, I think you're correct. Katie?
Hey, Jennifer. Oh, excuse me,
Yes,
Jen.
Julie.
I just put in the chat the text from the statute.
Did
The
you
recommendation shall
I'm not
include.
sure I see anything in here.
Oh, here you go. Maybe
There
I
we
should
go.
hit
Thank
send.
you. Thank you. All right.
Yeah,
I'm
no problem.
scanning through this a little bit.
Yeah, so I think this thank you, Julie. That's what I was looking for.
Of course.
Looking through the statute and I wasn't getting to it. So I think this small number 1 here kind of addresses this question: recommendations on specific extended producer responsibility approaches and other strategies. I think that kind of sums it up.
Yep. Okay, Katie?
Taking us kind of back to the conversation that was happening when I raised my hand, I did want to provide maybe a little bit of insight from the producer or manufacturer perspective about why we don't have a PRO. A lot of it has to do with wanting to drive kind of market factors or competition into a system. That's a lot of reasons why electronics manufacturers have never coalesced around establishing a PRO. They want that competition sort of in the marketplace, and to have those options for kind of choosing among plans. Again, those market economics sort of driving that in where they can. And then also a lot of electronics manufacturers have strong relationships with electronics recyclers. Those 2 certification programs, a lot of times those are just the floor for manufacturers or producers. They have their own set of standards they want electronics recyclers to achieve. So they want that flexibility to be able to work with the electronics recyclers that they've chosen to work with. So that was all. I just wanted to provide a little insight there.
Thank you. Other questions, comments, data that's missing? I'll give you a little background on what I think is important for making decisions or my philosophy about decision making, which is that if a decision is hard, it means you don't have enough information. So if we had all the information we needed, this would be easy. So thinking about it that way, I'd like to know, what do you feel like you need to know before we can craft a recommendation or a decision to hand over to the legislature? Catherine.
I think the stuff that Juanita said she's working on, to understand the costs to the municipalities, that's the big thing that, regional planning agencies, we represent the cities and towns across the Commonwealth. And so I'm assuming that's what I need to be, the audience that I need to be representing. And I know Phil is here and I always appreciate his comments, but to me, that's the big thing is how much is it costing our municipalities now, and how much is it going to save when we have EPR? How much
Yeah.
easier is it going to be for them? So yeah, the cost benefit on the municipal staff and municipalities just being overburdened.
Thank you. Who else? A bunch of folks on the call that I have not seen or heard you. Would love to get your input if you're still with us. Katie, then Jason.
And sorry, you've heard a lot from me, so I'm probably not the person you want to hear from. But I think exactly the data from that Winetta said she was going to be gathering would be great to hear. I think also an acknowledgement that producers are under an EPR structure responsible for funding the collection and recycling of that structure. So there is input on what that structure should look like based on those who are paying for the system. And again, we've talked a little bit, I think it's hopefully clear to everyone, there's a lot of nuance of these programs. So just making a recommendation that EPR might be the path forward or not, depending on what comes out of the full commission, there's also a lot of nuance in what that program looks like. I think you've heard, it's not just lifting a piece of model legislation that exists. It's sort of then what structure would you, if EPR is the path to go down, what does that structure look like for the Commonwealth?
Yeah. When I think about the tables with all of the particulars of each program, I think for me, the piece that's missing is what's working and what's not working in each of those states. So I would love to see data on that, or at least connect data that I'm receiving. Juanita?
So, Katie, I would say we do want to hear from you because you're representing a lot of the manufacturers, the stakeholder group that, would be very important to have support or buy-in from, to craft a system that would work and be based on lessons learned in other states. Is there any type of EPR model that CTA would be open to, or willing to discuss, or any type of model, like specific like program elements that either are like a must-have or a non-starter, like those types of things? I think that fits a lot into like the pros and cons of an EPR program coming from the perspective of the manufacturer stakeholder group.
Katie, I'm going to have you think about that. And then I'm going to go to Phil and then Jason, and then we'll wrap back. Phil.
We've actually been having this discussion internally amongst several of us. These are the kind of the core issues. And then we really want some programs to pass. We've been waiting for many, many, many years in Massachusetts to get a program. We want something passed. The legislature is inundated with 6,500 bills. It's a 2-year process, and we get to the end, and there's objections and any kind of hiccups. It's easy to say no and punt. My deep concern about this commission, and with DEP for that matter, is that this could happen again with sort of a vague set of, oh, we ought to do this. Well, we all know we ought to do it. It's always all the sausage making we're talking about now. So what I think really would be helpful is for the commission, e-waste is a prime example. Packaging and plastics is another example. These are very complex issues on these bigger topics, but maybe not so much under paint and others. But to really to do that deeper dive and to have that as a regular, more dedicated function of DEP staff. John, you're not going to like this, but the reality is DEP is going to be the overseer manager of any program. So I think DEP ought to start looking at having staff assigned to becoming internal experts and pulling this together to assess what they would like to see for oversight from their stakeholder position. And we have the mix and match around the country and other places in Europe and Canada. What is working on particular materials? We want the version 4.0 passed in Massachusetts. We don't want version 1.0 and have to start all over again. Let's take advantage of what other people's already have done. The clearinghouse, what does that mean? Is that better than a PRO? I don't know. But I'm a process guy. I mean, we build facilities, we get things permitted, we have to make, years and years of planning and persuading. And I can just tell you, it's easy to not want to do the dirty work of getting down and getting your hands into this sort of stuff, because we've already seen 15 years we can't get paint passed in Massachusetts. So I think coming out of all this is not necessarily the answers today, but the process to get to those answers. And I think if the commission were to recommend that DEP have some funding internally to keep the conversation and the studies going, I would feel better about the way this goes forward, because the legislature and the staff could then lean on DEP for expertise where they're out there by themselves. Juanita and I work with some staffers. Again, we feel great, like they gave us some attention on a briefing, but we all know that's very, very short-lived. They've got 100 other issues to deal with. They cannot be experts in all these things. So the process to get to those answers is just as important to me as what those answers are, obviously. So I hope that we don't dissipate this commission without some sort of way to go forward, have the discussion, and really get into the elements. And PSI is an expert at that. And maybe you can help out with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Jason.
Yeah, just getting back to a couple of things. There's a question about, well, first, Jen, you made a comment about, well, let's look at what's going on in other states and see what's working, what's not. And we can certainly, we have some data. There's others that have data. You can look at just total pounds that have been collected. You can look at the total number of sites. There's not going to be a clear-cut answer, I don't think, on what definitely works under these programs. All those different elements that are up there, there's different flavors of that in a lot of different states. And I get asked a lot, what's the best model out there, what's working best? And I don't have an answer for that, because there are so many differing opinions too about what type of stakeholder you are may influence what you think is working well in a particular state and what's not working well in another state. So just having strong collection targets or high collection targets may be one thing, but another state might have a greater number of collection sites per capita. Is that the best approach? Is one working over the better or the other? It's hard to say. And I would say one other thing, there's a comment about the cost for the towns right now in Massachusetts, and that's one thing you definitely want to know. Also, I would think you'd want to know about the structure for how their relationships are with their recyclers, because that is another challenge to overcome when you're implementing an EPR program if you didn't have one in the past. And we really haven't had in the US a new EPR program for electronics come online in over 10 years now. But it is a challenge that we've seen time and again when that does happen, because the relationships between the local collectors and who they use as a recycler does change under EPR as opposed to what you're working with now. So the manufacturers may have a structure where they need to work with a group plan, work with a clearinghouse, work with an individual recycler, and those recyclers may be different than the ones that are being utilized today. So there is some change in the existing relationships that can happen, not always, but it can. And that has to be accounted for in how you're thinking about the transition to a program that's where some of the costs are offset by the EPR program, but some of the relationships also may be changing under that structure based on how the law is set up. So I just want to put that out there, one thing to keep in mind.
Thanks, Jason. You mentioned something that I think maybe hasn't been done quite yet with probably any of the topics that's before the EPR Commission, and maybe each person thinks that it has, but identifying clear goals for each product, because as you pointed out, convenience is one metric by which you could measure a goal, or waste diversion is another potential goal, or quantity of recyclables, reusable materials obtained, that's another goal. But if we don't know which ones we're advocating for, then we don't actually know which pros and cons we should be researching to determine whether we're successful at any of those things. So I think it will be helpful for the commission. Personally, I think it will be helpful for the commission to talk about what goals they have in mind. Bill, glad you could pipe in.
Yep, Bill Rennie, Retailers Association of Massachusetts, member of the commission. One of the things when we were asking about, what data is missing, and I think it's pointing out that this data is missing, but also pointing out that I'm probably the one responsible for it, because I wanted to try and find out some additional information from my own members who do collect electronics, and because I know we do have a couple members in particular who are significant collectors and recyclers of electronics. And I had reached out for some of that data. I don't have it yet. I should have sent a reminder to them sooner, but I want to try and at least introduce that to see what information could be there, because I think one of our main points, all these years on the e-waste legislation that's been before the legislature, has been, look, we don't want to see any advanced recovery fees, like you saw initially out in California on computers and televisions. We don't want to see mandatory collection at retail, but we do want to preserve and hopefully protect those existing programs that may already be in place. Could they be integrated into whatever new program or system that the legislature or the commission recommends, to the extent that they're working and consumers are using them, and should they want to continue. So I do have a couple inquiries out to some of my members for additional data on at least the collection on the retail side here in Massachusetts, and hope to follow up with that.
Thank you. That would be very helpful. Juanita.
Thanks, Bill. I think that brings up a very important point that really hasn't been discussed yet, we've focused on the municipal side of things because that is a presumably significant portion of the current existing collection network. But there are some retailers, two that I'll name just off the top of my head are Staples and Best Buy, that do accept small electronics. I think Best Buy takes larger electronics like TVs for a fee. And that is part of the collection system. And in other states where those programs existed and then an EPR system came online, they became part of that system. So where manufacturers have a convenience standard that they must meet, those types of retail collection sites that volunteer and want to participate in the program, they essentially count as one of the collection points meeting the manufacturer's convenience obligation. And so that's how that has unfolded in other places. And I also just want to address that I'm not aware of a program that mandates retailers to be a collection site. I'm not actually aware of any programs that mandate that for any product, but specifically electronics for this call. So that's not something that, to my knowledge, any stakeholder group would be seeking.
Thank you. Scott?
Thank you, Juanita, for mentioning the Staples project. I was going to mention it, one, because it's important, as Juanita mentioned, that that infrastructure, which was done voluntarily by Staples to get people into the store as a way to have better business. And we also, I worked with 5 states, including the MassDEP, Staples, and the US EPA. It was actually John Beeling's wife, Chris Beeling, who I worked with. And this was a number of years ago, and developed the first computer take back in the country at Staples in Massachusetts. And so that spread across the country. And that is how the infrastructure works. So, Bill, great question. And just the other question that you asked, there's very few mandatory retail collections. There are some, there are not ones that, frankly, we like to support because we know the retailers want to do their own thing. But New York has one in batteries. They have an old battery law on rechargeable batteries. They amended that law recently, and it still has a retail mandate for collection in New York City. And so I don't know if they expanded that nationally, but that is one of the exceptions there. But most of the retailers collecting voluntarily like to get people into their store. And the Staples one, I did personal interviews, and they felt loyalty to Staples. They didn't say, yes, I bought a whole bunch of stuff, but it was the loyalty factor that was really clear. So I just thought I'd toss that out.
Thanks, Scott. So we have roughly 20 minutes left on this call, but I'm looking for any other comments, questions, or if you feel like you're exhausted and sick of talking about this for today. We certainly have a lot of input and information from you all. Scott.
The sense of people wanting to leave early and go, darn, I thought I had 20 minutes. I wanted to just ask here, while we have the opportunity for Katie and also for Jason, in terms of it was maybe along the line of Juanita's question a little bit, in terms of, is there any EPR program that might be satisfactory to the industry for a new program? I know that we've worked on a number of amendments together there, and Jen, you had mentioned looking at the goals. I would say it's equally important to maybe first to look at the problems, like what exists right now in Massachusetts. Like where are you? And I think Juanita laid out some of those problems. The goals have to follow the problems. And so the convenience, is one, and others. But I'm just wondering if there is possibility from the industry's perspective of considering, or are there other strategies that you feel will address those problems better? Not EPR, something else.
Anybody from industry want to comment on that?
I can comment. I know Scott had also asked Jason, and maybe a distinction. Jason doesn't represent the producers in this scenario. He's more just kind of a expert that pulls together experience from all stakeholders involved in this program. So I don't want anyone thinking Jason's speaking on behalf of the producers, more just speaking on behalf of the experience of the programs themselves. You know, we don't have model legislation that we have coalesced around at this point in time. As Jason was noting, it is a true patchwork that we have, and we haven't had a new law in the books in over a decade, where we have focused efforts in recent years is kind of these aging 20-year-old programs that we have in a lot of states, and needing reform to those programs to make them work better for the stakeholders that are participating in the programs in whatever that jurisdiction is. So we don't have, you know, lift and shift piece of legislation like a lot of other industries may have. And I think that is because of the fact that we have started from a very much a patchwork approach here in the United States for electronics recycling. And we've built and grown over 20 years of what has worked and what hasn't worked. While producers are a very important piece of the stakeholders active within these programs, obviously, if we're financially supporting and paying for these systems, we have strong opinions on sort of what does or doesn't need to work. But I think it is actually a multitude of stakeholders that have to come together. You know, how is the system currently operating in the Commonwealth, and where would we want to see changes made, or what kind of changes would the current structure be open to? How this collection around retailer collection programs. There are also nonprofits out there that collect electronics and that are active in a multitude of the state EPR programs as well. Where do they fit into the system? So, you know, while I think we have some policy principles that we can bring to the table, we have recent change in, you know, Illinois and Oregon that have happened to the programs there. I think maybe where Phil was going is maybe the track that needs to be had of a more robust dialogue and discussion, because there isn't just a lift and shift piece of legislation, because there are a multitude of stakeholders that we're talking about, as well as existing programs that may need to change or may need to be tweaked to become a part of the program. It's more of kind of an open dialogue that I think would need to happen as part of the conversation. And then, you know, we're always supportive of our companies having voluntary programs. Many of them support voluntary programs throughout the United States. They may partner with retailers, they may partner with nonprofits, they may partner with directly with electronics recyclers or entities collecting electronics at the local level. So we continue to be supportive of those programs. You know, it's kind of been an evolution over the past several years. EPA used to have a program that was since sunset under their Sustainable Materials Management Program called the SMM Electronics Challenge. A multitude of CTA's members were supportive of that effort, which was really just around sort of overall programs throughout the United States. Some, you know, being able to tap into what's happening under the EPR programs, but also voluntary programs. And then CTA, we used to have our own program as well that we sunset a while ago too. So I don't have the latest data on all of the voluntary efforts of manufacturers, but we do know that those voluntary efforts continue to exist around the country.
Thank you. Juanita?
So I had touched on this before in the question that Scott referred to, but I'm wondering if for the purposes of the EPR Commission in Massachusetts, if CTA would be willing to put like together a one-page document or something that just describes provisions, like specific provisions that again would either be something that they're like open to or even in favor of, and any specific provisions of an EPR program for electronics that again are a non-starter or like would really cause the manufacturers to be, you know, in opposition to a model that would be created. Or, you know, if it's like, no, we don't want an EPR system, I think that's valuable information for the commission to have as well. And, you know, to know that there's like, you know, specific opposition, you know, like just opposition in general or overall opposition to an EPR system.
Maybe.
Katie, is it something you would be willing to?
Well, maybe a question back to Jennifer. I mean, some of that comes into our opinions as a stakeholder, part of the process. Is this advisory council and the commission meant to be we're gathering factual information? about how these programs operate and exist, or is it what folks do or don't want to see as part of?
So I can answer that, and then we'll go back to Juanita. The documents that I've been preparing that have been based on information that PSI has pulled together and EPA and then, industry, the bulk of it is fact-based. And then at the end of the document is intended to be public opinion. So who's in favor and who's against. And so it's like we're sort of attaching additional documentation. And so I can see that that would be a good place to include your comments. Juanita, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I'll just follow up on that. Like, as a commission member, I think it's extremely valuable to get information on the stance of different stakeholder groups. And, certainly presented to the commission, like those stakeholder groups bringing valid, useful facts to the table is also useful. But I think understanding the opinion of a very important stakeholder group in this conversation is valuable to know the direction of the direction of the recommendations from the commission. Because again, if the industry is opposed to an EPR system at all, then what the commission could be doing is either saying this merits further research, or we actually recommend a different model, like XYZ, that again would be agreeable to the manufacturers. I just see that as being very important information, whether it's, a quantitative fact or not. I would say, like, the opinion of a trade association representing electronics manufacturers is a fact that I need to know to make a decision for this commission.
Yeah, agreed. It's a data point. I think it's pretty important to understand. Phil.
I put this in the chat. Bill mentioned from RAM that they would be opposed to an upfront fee, like in California. I was reading about that plan out there today. I'm just curious why. I don't know if the commission, maybe something for the commission to have as a element to look at for all of these. In one hand, as a consumer, it might be nice to know that it's being paid for and upfront. I know there's some cons against that. And some people like to have it all embedded, encourages better design, so forth, so on. I'm not an expert in this. That's Scott and Juanita and others. But I know when I get my tires done, I don't have to worry about it getting done because you go to the tire place and they usually have a fee associated with disposal. I think it's in there, or waste oil. And it's taken care of, and I feel good that it's taken care of. An eco fee, whatever, instead of trying to figure it out at the end of the pipeline, scrambling to collect money to pay for it. It'd be nice to have it, again, embedded, but trying to get all those herd all those cats with all the manufacturers, as you will. But I agree with Juanita. It'd be nice to know if they're deal breakers. I understand from the retailers that they don't want to be mandated to be collection sites. There are small business owners that don't have the space and the room. That has been voluntary for some of these programs, but I think we need to hear from the retailers again. What are some of these deal breakers so that we can understand if we can make a better way forward? Thanks.
Thank you. Scott?
I'll defer to Bill if he has a comment here, since it was directed to retailers first, and then I could make a comment.
Bill, do you want?
I was going to answer that, but
Yeah, go ahead.
so look, generally, I would say we're opposed to any, upfront or recovery fee, deposit fee, and I think it's an advanced recovery fee out in California. There are, over the years, there've been, I don't know how many bills that have proposed that to add a fee, a bag fee, the bottle bill, different fees on products up front to be collected at retail, to be submitted back to the state, to go to some dedicated fund, whether it's the Clean Environment Fund or, under another name, that is then used to, send money out into the cities and towns to pay for recycling. There is a cost, yes, we do collect or remit sales tax to the state. There is a cost to do that. There is a cost to add, any new fees, reporting, anything like that onto retailers that is never reflected in this. Those dedicated funds that are created to collect all these fees, eventually, when the economy, goes down like it did, back in 2001, and the Ways and Means committees, reacting to the opinions of the bonding, the rating agencies like Moody's and the folks that look at the bond rating, they say get rid of all these dedicated funds, and they go in and sweep the funds, and then that money just goes to the general fund. So now it's just a tax on these products. The bottle bill, that the unclaimed deposits do not go into any clean environment fund anymore. That's been gone for 20 something years. So, we, as a matter of kind of policy, we would oppose upfront recovery fees charged to consumers. We oppose it on paint. Mattresses is one that where it's a little, it seems to be like it might be a little different on mattresses. We're still trying to work our way through that. But these fees are often not charged at your competition, whether it's across the border, which often can be right across the street, or online. So it's just, we don't like Massachusetts specific or Massachusetts only policies or things that put us in a position and a less than competitive position. We'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Scott?
Yeah, I can just follow up 2 points. One is that the first electronics law in recycling law in the country was California, and that was an advanced recycling fee. The industry was actually split in this. There was one company that was from the discussions back to 2000 that wanted the advanced recycling fee, but most others didn't. But it passed in California, but it was the retail opposition all across the country that really put the kibosh on that. And so that's why you're only seeing cost internalization of all the electronics. The advanced recycling fee, though, we don't consider it, our state and local governments don't consider it EPR because it is consumer funded and government managed. So that program's government managed with a lot of government employees in California, which wasn't the intention of EPR. And so the paint program is different, mattresses is different, but just wanted to give a little history in there. So I don't think it's going back there on electronics anyway. We can talk about some of these nuanced differences for the other programs at another time, but thought that would be helpful. And I knew Bill would be articulate about that.
Thank you. All right. I think we are approaching the end, and I want to, there we go. So not to say brainstorming. So just to reiterate, the draft background document on electronics to share with the commission is due Friday, August 29th. So I know some of you are still waiting on a little bit of information to send over. So I'll keep an eye out for that. And then again, our initial EPR commission meeting on electronics is September 17th, which feels like a million years away, but it isn't. But I really want to say how much I appreciate this discussion and on all of these questions and points today. I think my goal has been to really blow up the issue and get as many, both pieces of information and then questions outstanding as possible so that, we can really look at this from all perspectives at the commission level. So I've been taking notes. My hope is to create a list of I think additional points of clarification that I want to send around to this group. And I'll probably fold that into the background document that I had sent out to you all. I'm going to make some updates and changes to that based on this conversation and based on some emails. If you still want to send me comments on that document, please feel free to do so. We'll say like within the next 2 weeks. That would be really helpful. I'd like it to be as robust and complete as possible. And then I think this is probably our last meeting as the advisory group, unless anyone wants to schedule another 2-hour meeting, and we'd be happy to do that. Catherine, is that a
I do
yes?
not want to schedule another 2-hour meeting. I just wanted to know timing so that I can get on the agenda for the Massachusetts Association of Regional Planning Agencies to run by any preliminary recommendations so I can get all their input.
Yeah.
I know when we talked about the paint, it was going to be September. Is it similarly that like we would have October, what we would be expecting people, like what's the timeline for when we're going to have a preliminary recommendation that we can run by the constituents that we're representing so that we can give full input?
That is a great question. With these later topics that with electronics and packaging, I think our expectations were not as high as they were for the other 3 topics. So, John, do you have a response to that? I mean, I think the recommendation is not necessarily going to be to pass legislation, but it may be to, you know,
I guess my question is, will we have a preliminary thing like a month in advance to share with constituents, or should we just be feeding them stuff as much as we can throughout and saying, get me any input you have?
Catherine, was there a particular, I'm sorry, was there a particular meeting or date that you're focused on?
No, I just want to work back from when the Massachusetts Association of Regional Planning Agencies meet so that I can make sure I get on their agenda with any content. I just wanted to know when you're expecting to get stuff. Do
Yeah.
I need to be on their
Is-
September meeting or October or
Oh, I see.
August?
They have ongoing meetings.
Yeah,
Okay.
they meet monthly, so I just wanted to know which one I should get
Yeah.
on.
So, I don't know.
Okay.
I can tell you that, I think we'll have some feel for that at the end of the September meeting. We'll come together and at the end of the September meeting, talk about, what next steps seem appropriate at that point. That likely won't be a fully formed recommendation at that point. And probably what we'll strive to do is to try to develop something for consideration at the October meeting, so in advance of the October meeting. But again, like Jen mentioned, we feel like, mattresses and paint care in particular were a little bit different because there was kind of a model program out there that, maybe had some wrinkles state to state, but pretty consistent. And as we've talked about here today, that's not the case with electronics. So we don't have that to work from. So that's not like totally answering your question, but I think we'll have some idea after the September meeting, and then probably a better idea leading up to the October meeting.
yeah, agreed. Juanita and then Phil, really quickly.
I just had a quick request that, like what you just stated before about like a 2-week deadline for material from like the other data that's been talked about. Like if you can just send that in an email so
Yes,
that,
absolutely.
okay.
Yeah. All of these meeting notes and then assignments are going to go in an email.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Phil?
This is really for the end of the whole commission's wrap up, and to the point that was mentioned, that Catherine was mentioning. And I mentioned it earlier in passing, but I want to make sure it's a little more distinct for John. That DEP comes out of this, that this whole thing doesn't end with a report to the legislature and they fulfill the legislative mandate and then it goes away. And then it goes on a shelf or on a website, and then, that's it. It's in the master plan as an option for the future. I really think DEP needs to have this on as a regular discussion point underneath the umbrella of the SWAC, whether it's a working group a subcommittee on a regular basis with staff that can build expertise on national models, that they, if they want to hire PSI or someone for advice quarterly or something like that, I don't know. But I would hate to see all this energy and effort dissipate very quickly before we do the next master plan update. So, we did this with the household hazardous waste / products discussion, where we were woefully under developed an infrastructure year round on household hazardous waste collections. And so now there's a working group. We can keep the conversation going. And if it's on your radar, John, and I know you have limited staff, it's kind of my wish list, but I would hate, there needs to be a follow through on this to keep the conversation going beyond the commission. And I think DEP needs to internalize that and make it a par for the course, because if we get these laws passed, DEP will be, significantly involved. So it's kind of, you don't have to answer that now. I just want to get that on, on your radar, that these things tend to happen where they, all the energy is focused and then it kind of just dissipates. It goes away. So thanks.
Thanks, Phil. All right. Again, thank you, everybody. You'll get a note from me, and hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Ciao.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks, everyone.
Ciao.